result of that, they don't seem to be making any concessions here. We'd hope that there would be some, after a very rough period of time, of course, we'd hope there'd be some way of maybe getting this resolved without anyone being hurt. Well, let's bring in someone now who can shed some more light on this. We're joined by Liz Harrington, a staff writer for the Washington Free Beacon, who has been covering this story. Liz, thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
What is the current situation of the standoff? Is it confirmed that there are federal agents surrounding at least a part of this property, that they do in fact have snipers on site, and that Bundy's not backing down an inch? Is that more or less where things stand as we are here now?
Well, it is confirmed that there are, what the Bundys say, 200, what's their estimate, armed officials. The Bureau of Land Management is saying that these are just security guards in place. But we do know, there's photo evidence of this, that they do have people scoping out some what appears to be snipers. It's all surrounded. I talked to the Bundys this afternoon. There were no incidents yet today, as of yet. But there's still the very heavy presence, automatic weapons, snipers. Again, the Bureau of Land Management says this is just in response to death threats that they've received. There's been a lot of heated rhetoric, as you said, up until this point. So far, the son, as you mentioned, was arrested for taking pictures on the side of the state highway, which the BLM has blocked off, as they have, you know, the entire surrounding area of this 600,000 acres. They've completely blocked off. So far, there hasn't been anything else today. Yesterday, there were, 8 helicopters surrounded the family when they again went out to take pictures. So it's definitely getting heated, but no incidents yet. Anything else today?
This has raised a number of issues, as we mentioned at the start here. One of them is, why does the federal government have so much land? In fact, in the state of Nevada, I think over 80% of land is owned by the state or by the federal government. And the Las Vegas Review has pointed out that instead of rounding up Mr. Bundy's cattle on the public's dime, the Bureau of Land Management should sell more of its land holdings to local owners in Nevada, Utah, and across the West, who would be far better caretakers. They certainly couldn't do any worse than Washington. What's the federal government need with grazing land? Does somebody want to, other than protecting turtles? That seems to be maybe something we should be looking at apart from the Bundy standoff now.
The federal government owns a staggering amount of land in the western United States. As you said, it's over 80%. I believe it's 84% of the state of Nevada. It's the
federal government basically owns the state of Nevada,
yes,
more or less, by the numbers.
And huge swaths of the western third of the United States.
California
and,
also.
A lot of the excuse is that, well, the land isn't the most easily developed. It maybe isn't the most useful land. Well, look, private industry did pretty well in Vegas, which is in the middle of the desert wasteland. So let's see what they can do, because as these folks are saying, they certainly wouldn't do any worse than the feds.
Look, there are several factors involved here. I mean, from the Grazing Rights Act from 1934, and that they pay, certain fees to graze here, and collecting that revenue, to property rights, to why the hell does the Bureau of Land Management have a SWAT team? Back in the 90s, I was an intern for Senator Larry Craig, and at the time, Ruby Ridge was going on in Idaho, and he was doing hearings, and he wanted to know how many federal law enforcement agencies were there in the U.S. and how many had SWAT teams. Do you know how hard it was to get that information? And the Bureau of Land Management was one of those federal agencies where we said, why does the BLM have a SWAT team? Well, obviously, it's for things like this, and I think that is a dangerous overreach to protect for some environmental protection issue. I mean, this is ridiculous. I find it hard to believe you can't resolve it another way.
I was going to ask Elizabeth this question, because you're right, Tara, about that. I mean, there's a lot of issues involved here, but particularly for the Bundys, what are you seeing? Did they tell you how they're going to react if the government keeps pushing forward? Have they told you what they're planning on doing beyond what we've been reading?
Well, they really feel like there's nothing else they can really do except try to get their story out there. They tried it through the legal ends, they tried it through political ends, and now they just kind of feel like they're surrounded and they don't really have any other recourse. I mean, they did not, make mention of any plans or any, that they would ever resort to violence at all. That is not the case. But they really feel like there's not much more that they can do except just go to the media to get it out there. If I could just add one more thing about the BLM armed officers. There was an incident in Nevada just outside of Las Vegas only 2 months ago where there was a disturbance along a state highway where 2 BLM rangers approached this man. He was in his 20s. He was being disorderly, but they did not arrest him, and they were following him around. And then they ended up shooting him 8 times to death because he was going into a police car that was nearby, and they thought he was reaching for a gun. So you have, I mean, there's other concerns here too. With you have these federal agencies that are armed with weapons. You know, people question if they have the proper training, and you know, that is still under investigation. We can't get a lot of information out, but it's definitely, you know,
it's heightening the tensions for
when you
sure.
have all
Right.
of these agents now.
We need to understand that I think we can have several positions here, and they all can be true, and that is the BLM owns too much land. I'm sure there's some land they could sell off to more productive purposes in the private sphere. That the BLM is certainly at the mercy of ridiculous environmental laws like these tortoise protection laws that are basically just excuses to push private properties off of BLM land. That's what they are. They're looking for excuses. But we can also come to the conclusion that this dude should have been paying his grazing fees. That's the understanding. That's the requirement. And from what I understand, he was racking up these grazing fees long before the environmental protection laws came into play in '98. So you sign up for it. You let your cows graze on it. You pay for it. All the other
the ranchers are not really making much noise about standing behind him on this one.
Right. They pay their grazing fees.
Yeah, and also it was reported that there's a First Amendment zone set up out here where they could only have protesters, and that the son was arrested because he took pictures and he allegedly violated this First Amendment zone, which I think is absolutely unacceptable. If you know that's public land, you should be able to exercise your First Amendment.
The federal government loves to take people to court. If you want to take this guy to court, but to take his cattle and force this standoff, they're trying to make a point. They're trying to set an example, and they look imperious and tyrannical sometimes in the process. But thank you very much, Liz, for joining us. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts on this.
Thanks for having me.
TheBlaze.com